Hi, welcome to another episode of the Brown Girl Green Show. My name is Christy Drutman, and I interview environmental leaders and advocates about diversity and inclusion, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. I'm working to change the image of what it means to be an environmentalist in the 21st century. Today, I have an incredible guest from Break Free from Plastic, and she's going to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her work today. Let's dive right in and get started. So, I would love for you to just take a moment to introduce yourself, who you are, and where you're from.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Shilpi Chhotray. Thank you so much, Christy, for having me on. I am the Global Communications Lead for the Break Free from Plastic movement. So we are a global conglomeration of nearly 2,000 NGOs now and organizations working all around the world at different points in the plastic pollution life cycle. So I do work at the global level with really amazing people everywhere on planet Earth, but I'm based in Oakland, California.
That's great. And in your opinion, how would you describe you are changing the image of what it means to be an environmentalist, and what do you like about your approach?
I mean, I think, Christy, there's like no question the environmental world is dominated by white leadership and organizational staff with very little reality of what's actually happening to communities most impacted. And as a nature lover myself, of course, our efforts to protect environmental ecosystems are important, but it shouldn't be at the expense of communities of color who are often on the front lines of the foremost humanitarian crises, right? Not even environmental crises. These are massive people-centric problems, climate change, rights to clean water and air, and plastic pollution, which is what my work is focused on. So I came into plastics from an ocean plastic lens. I studied marine science and policy, which is predominantly white, was often the only brown person in the classroom, in graduate school, at conferences, feeling the burden to speak up for other people that look like us. It's definitely challenging. I love Break Free from Plastic because it's the first job I've had in like the last 10 years, my whole career, where it's not dominated by traditional white NGO voices, and the leadership is really centered around communities most impacted, both in the US and globally. So, I mean, I think you probably noticed this too, Christy, with your work, which is great, is, a lot of progress is being made lately with the state of awakening on racial justice in our country, but there still is a lot to be done, especially around tokenization and marginalization of certain groups for the benefit of others. So we really need to watch out for that.
Totally. And I think it's really great that you are now working in a space where you feel empowered and included to, share your voice and share your ideas about how we can make change moving forward. And especially because the plastic crisis is a really big crisis that needs to be addressed, and we need definitely more brown people at the table talking about it.
And creating the table, right?
Yeah.
Not coming to the table later, but actually creating it. What does it look like? What does this mean for my community? And what am I going to benefit from joining and creating the space? So we've been really intentional. Big kudos to the US team for Break Free from Plastic for just being super careful and thoughtful and really prioritizing those voices.
That's amazing. And we're going to get into this a little bit more about like the difference between, individual consumer action versus like challenging the system around plastic waste. But I am wondering, just to start off with, like, how do you actually feel, with people of color, like BIPOC communities, where a lot of the conversation around reducing your plastic waste is really like placed on the consumer? That's usually like the typical mainstream rhetoric is like the individual needs to reduce, but a lot of BIPOC folks, or even like low income communities, feel like pursuing a plastic-free lifestyle is really inaccessible. So I'm just wondering, just to start off with, like, what are your thoughts about that narrative that like the burden should be on the individual consumer, and how do you actually take that conversation and make it more accessible to communities that otherwise that messaging doesn't land for them?
That's such a great question. I mean, we are all about systems change, and we strongly believe corporations have a moral responsibility to shift to alternative delivery systems and make sure they're not greenwashing. We're seeing a lot of frustrating false solutions there, like upcycling plastic waste from the ocean, turning it into products and packaging that sounds really sexy and it's getting a lot of attention. But ironically, that same packaging will either end up in landfill, back in the ocean, or shipped overseas. And that's the piece that I want to talk about a little bit more. So, Christy, I think you talk about this on your social media channels, which is great when I took a look today, but only 9% of plastic has been recycled globally, and of that it's really 2 to 4% that's been managed well. And so we really need to look at stopping plastic at the source. Not to mention, plastic is deeply connected to climate change. About 99% of plastic comes from a fossil fuel derived source, and in every stage of the life cycle, communities, everyday people are burdened and face enormous health consequences from this toxic life cycle. On your question of, bridging the gap of plastic-free life cycle, plastic-free lifestyle when it feels inaccessible to, often low-income communities of color, I don't really see this as a challenge, because in fact, we can learn a lot from lower income communities who are inherently low waste because there's little to spare. For instance, in many Latino communities, the customs, habits, and practices learned at home are all about reusing and wasting less. I'm Indian American, so I've spent a lot of time growing up in India, and I've also seen firsthand when I visit villages in India and actually Philippines too. Literally nothing is wasted, and there's a culture of sharing within the community. So I think really the disconnect on the current zero waste movement focused on like trendy products and lifestyle and millennial culture, which is great for certain demographics. I mean, I love my water bottle, but it shouldn't alienate those who have been practicing these ways at the community level for generations. So one of our member organizations, Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, who is certainly a pioneer in zero waste cities all over the world, is working to reclaim this term to focus on grassroots everyday citizens rather than bring your own water bottle or skipping the straw. Again, it's not to say one is better than the other, but I feel there is a strong disconnect at the individual lifestyle approach, which does feel inaccessible to a lot of BIPOC communities. And the community-based approach that really pioneered. I feel like there's this sense of gratitude and respect that we owe to these generations that have done this inherently in their culture.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, also like Filipino culture too. Like I grew up reusing plastic bags, reusing like butter tins for like sewing equipment. Like it's totally like, yeah, growing up it was like, that's not because it's trendy, it's because we need to save money, and why are we going to buy more Tupperware? Like, why are we going to buy more Tupperware when we have like all these plastic bins? So yeah, I totally agree with you.
I completely understand. Like, so you probably can relate. Like, I have really curly hair like you, and when I was in middle school, I would be like, Mom, I really need to get this hair product. And she's like, no, there's coconut oil in the pantry, And now, like 20 years later, I like douse it in my hair. And it's like, I don't even buy, really any products, mostly because I'm concerned with chemicals, but it's also inherently more sustainable. So it's interesting how often if you are raised by immigrant parents or you grow up in that kind of culture, the lifestyle is already ingrained in you from the beginning.
Totally. And I think, you brought up a really good point about, trying to transition the conversation from not just being like, oh, let's like buy this lifestyle, to more like, no, let's understand what this lifestyle supposedly means and what the impacts are, and like actually like who are the communities at the forefront being impacted by not addressing the waste crisis, and actually trying
100%.
to educate yourself about that. Because I think a lot of people don't include that in their, you know, checklist. They're like, okay, I got it. Reusable straw, bamboo toothbrush. I got my flaws, but I haven't read anything about, you know, waste incineration in the global south. And you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, but it's like, I agree with you. Not one is better than the other. I think it's not about like, oh, let's shame people. I think that's where it needs to end. I think it's about like taking that object as a conversation starter and being able to pull in other people to be like, yeah, this symbolizes like all these other things that need to shift. So I think they're very complementary.
100%. I mean, it's like the bamboo toothbrush is a great gateway to, okay, how do I level up as a citizen who cares about this issue? I'm using my wallet power wisely. Maybe you're supporting minority brands. I mean, that's another thing. It's not just plastic free. It's like, who is in charge of this company? We have to look at all these intersections, but then it's also like, okay, what's the next step I'm going to do here? Is it independent research? Is it taking it to my school group, my community group? Is it telling this restaurant, you know, I would appreciate if you had compostable to-go boxes. It's like opening up that discussion at the community level. And then, you know, that next step could be getting involved in policy and, you know, working towards legislative change that is designed to eliminate these kinds of products and toxic extractive economies in society. So I think you're absolutely right. Like we can't all be activists day and night. I mean, this is my job, so I have the luxury to do that, and same with you. But I do think, you know, what we call citizen muscles, they've gotten kind of weak. And in order to really shift this narrative and unfortunately, this downward spiral we've gotten into with the throwaway convenience culture, we have to level up. We need to be doing more than using the reusable water bottle, buying the bamboo toothbrush, etc.
Totally. And I mean, there's a lot of arguments, like even from some of my own family members that are older, like, oh, we were raised on like convenience culture. So it's like, who are you to say like we should just, you know, reverse that? But it's like one of those things where we do need to push people a little bit more to be like, it's not that like cutting down your consumption suddenly means your lifestyle or your life quality is going to decrease all of a sudden. If anything, it's like, I think if anything, it would improve your life because you're placing more value on the things that you own rather than just buying a bunch of disposable items as much as possible. But again, I just think like it's not a tangent, but it is an important part of the conversation that a lot of the big issue around people being like the plastic crisis could never be solved is because they're like, there's this issue of convenience culture, or they feel like that's so ingrained in our society. How could you possibly challenge that? And so just bridging off of that, I'm wondering, back to the individual, how do you feel that people can hold corporations and the government accountable for their actions while also balancing their needs for low cost and high convenience, especially in the middle of a pandemic, for example?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And it's really, it's a challenging one because we want to make sure we're considering safety first. That said, you know, we have immense power as individuals to call these companies out and demand better packaging and products. And there's a real brand reputation risk for companies to keep continuing this as usual. So we have something that we call brand audit, which is essentially taking coastal cleanup to the next level. So we're not just looking at the different types of plastic in the waste stream, which is great, but then the next hour it's all back, depending on where you are in the world, or the next week or the next month. But we're actually cataloging the brands. And we had over, you know, I think 800 cleanups focused on brand audit last year on World Cleanup Day in September 21st, I believe. And we had a robust data set of all of these brands that were being found polluting communities, beaches, coastlines, communal spaces all over the world. And the same polluters year after year keep appearing. Coca-Cola, Nestle, PepsiCo, Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble. These are parent companies of brands that might be local to your community in the Philippines or Indonesia or India. But the common thread is that all of them are headquartered in the global north. So there's a real corporate sense of chugging out plastic products and really exploiting these communities that don't have the infrastructure to deal with the waste. And I mean, in the US, we're not even dealing with our waste here either. We're shipping it overseas, like in 60%, I think, in the US is shipped to foreign markets. So it's like, it's a real challenge. I think in terms of the pandemic, again, the plastic industry has exploited COVID-19 for their gains. We've seen everything from rollbacks of plastic bag ban laws, including in the Bay Area. They're just brought it back now. And then asking ridiculously for a $1 billion industry bailout, even if the safety of reusables has been validated by health experts around the world. I mean, bailout should be going to communities most impacted, not corporations and industry. And again, I want to reiterate, like, safety is first. If you feel more comfortable using a plastic bag right now versus your reusable bag, or maybe your local grocer won't even consider your reusable bag. I mean, these are the sort of negotiations we have to have internally with ourselves, but we also need to be looking at the bigger picture and considering the end of life of all of this waste that's being generated, which is simply not more hygienic or safe, right? Especially those that are vulnerable to dealing with its end of life, like waste pickers, recyclers, communities where this waste is being dumped. Again, it's industry not taking full responsibility for the total life cycle of the product.
Totally. And I think another thing is just like with the plastic crisis going on with the pandemic, it's like these are the times when plastic should be okay, but it's like, think about all the years before that, all the decades before that. It's like, maybe plastic has a place in emergencies, but it's like, it shouldn't really be a place.
The norm.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting because it's like, it's like, I think people are like, oh no, now it's like, forget your environmental agenda. Like, we need plastic, like it's a sanitary right choice. And it's like, that's fair, but it's like, okay, like maybe it would be only fair in a pandemic. Why has this been happening for decades? And it's like, people are going to always come up with an excuse. The plastic industry is going to always come up with an excuse. And it's like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, I'm not like a healthcare official to like determine what is sanitary or the best for like plastic versus reusable use, but it's like, it just makes you suspicious that they are exploiting this moment, and that like they've exploited previous moments before this, and they're going to keep exploiting moments because plastic is so ubiquitous in our society that people don't even question it. They're just like, this is just how it is. They don't even think there's other possibilities because they're like, this is just how it is. So I don't know. I think that's where people need to like identify that there are alternative solutions. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I would love if you could provide a little bit more context, like policy wise, on like, why has plastic gotten so big? Why is it so powerful? I like really don't know how this all happened. It's so
That's a tough question, actually. I mean, I think, it goes back to the 50s, and it was literally like the housewives, and I don't blame them as a woman, like they were getting sick of doing the dishes and being burdened with household tasks, and the plastics industry came in and really marketed this culture of convenience to that 1950s housewife. And she was like, absolutely, if this is going to take time off of my, hands so I can be doing other things, then why not? And it just completely exploded. I don't know if you know this, Christy, but the plastic bag was like an accidental experiment by an oil company. I think it was Exxon, actually. So it is very much tied to petrochemicals. So there was extra petrochemical feedstock, and they ended up turning it into Tupperware and plastic bags, and they wanted to find a home for this. So again, it's been marketed very, very, very well as convenient, cheap, hygienic, safe. A lot of this has been manipulated through lobbyists for decades, and this is what we've been stuck with. What I'm really concerned with is actually the sachets. So if you've been to Asia, if you've been to the Philippines, Christy, you've seen they're basically ketchup-sized, individual ketchups that you get at like McDonald's, but for everything, for rice, for coffee, for shampoo. This is a single-use, multi-layer piece of trash that absolutely cannot be recycled in any sort of infrastructure. It's not built to be absorbed by the system, and so you find that absolutely littered everywhere. And because there's no value to it, the waste pickers, who are really the backbone of the informal recycling sector in places like Asia, Latin America, Africa, they have no incentive to pick it up. I mean, why would you? You're not getting anything out of it. And then, you know, corporations work with media to put out these narratives that Asia is to blame for the plastic pollution crisis, but you're creating in the global north, mostly in the US and Europe, these types of ridiculous products and packaging and opening up markets in these areas of the world. What infuriates me, don't really see that much in the US, right? So there's this double standard. Here, these companies will make commitments that sound really good, and they got a lot of media attention, but there's double standards that are existing all over the world. So I think we really need to look at this in a global perspective and call out the traitor, which is the corporations and the industry.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you know, towards the end of this interview, I'd love for you to lay out some of those steps, but we'll get there. So I am wondering, you know, based on this narrative, you know, you're going up against like really big lobby with lots of money, lots of power, obviously like has really had a deep hold on our society. I want to know, how does Break Free from Plastic use storytelling as a tool to connect people globally to the complex issue of plastic pollution in a way that you feel resonates with them?
Yeah, well, I work as communications lead for the movement, and it's not just the comm staff, but so much of what we do is storytelling, because there is an endless abundance of incredible stories to tell from activists all along the plastic pollution life cycle. So I think I mentioned earlier, we work with nearly 2,000 members across the globe, from extraction to disposal. So it's our job to elevate these voices and develop the platforms to get them out in the real world. I think what makes the movement so special is the cross-pollination between different topics and strategies within these groups around the world to make sure our voice is stronger together. Like, what does an activist in Houston, Texas, fighting the oil and gas industry have to do with a waste picker in New Delhi, India, and a lawyer that's working against plastic bags in Jakarta, Indonesia, all have in common? So it's a lot of this incredibly thoughtful strategic interventions with these groups from all around the world. It doesn't even really feel like your colleagues. It's like we're all really good friends. These are kind of people you share the same value systems with. And so it's really, really special. So I'll just put in a little plug. You can follow us at Break Free from Plastic on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we're definitely most active on Instagram. And I promise you'll get like way too much information on plastic, more than you'd ever want, by visiting. And then you can also join the movement by visiting breakfreefromplastic.org. And in the vein of storytelling, if you haven't heard of Story of Plastic, it's a documentary which reveals the true cost of plastic pollution, and it features members of our movement from around the world. And it's really a hard-hitting documentary on a lot of the things we've already discussed. Like, where does plastic actually come from? It doesn't just come from the shelves in the store. It comes from the oil and gas sector. where does it go when I put it in the blue bin? So it really travels through the entire life cycle of plastic pollution. And it's a super critical piece of film to watch for anyone that issue, I would say. So you can get more information at storyofplastic.org.
That's such a useful resource. Thank you. Story of Plastic blew my mind. It was really, that was actually how I even learned about Break Free from Plastic, actually, was Story of Plastic.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I think for me, that was the first time I really understood the story about waste pickers. I never learned of that term. I am wondering, because you have mentioned it a few times, and I don't know if some of the listeners know what that is. Could you explain what a waste picker is and their role in like the plastic life cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. So waste pickers are part of the informal recycling sector. So it depends on where they are in the world. I'm probably closest to the waste picker situation in India. They're often the lowest members of society, and they don't have like a regular paycheck or anything. So, the system that we have in the US is recyclers and waste collectors pick up our waste, or they can take it to a materials recovery facility and get money back for it. But in India and even areas of Philippines and Indonesia, it's a little bit of a different story. So they're picking up products and packaging, I should say, that couldn't be absorbed by their municipal recycling system, and they're basically trading this waste for some sort of value. And they're really they've really been dehumanized in the last few decades. And when you get into racial justice issues like India, for example, there's a lot of colorism, and there's still a caste system. And so these individuals are unfortunately just not treated with respect and dignity. So a lot of the work Break Free from Plastic members are doing, huge nod to Gaia on this, is actually elevating, humanizing these voices and like the real critical role they're playing in this informal economy. Not to mention all over Southeast Asia, the waste Europe and US ships over there, who's the one dealing with it? It's either illegally dumped and burned, which causes other health issues, alongside waste pickers like sorting through whatever they can salvage. So hopefully that gives a good enough illustration. I can go on this topic for a while, but I do also want to mention, we kind of have our version of waste pickers in different cities in the United States. So like in New York, if anyone from New York is on, these individuals are called canners, and it's often the person with the shopping cart collecting the aluminum. And then, so they're not hired by anyone necessarily, right? But they're doing this service for the community, keeping it clean, and then getting a little bit of money in exchange.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you defining that term. I think it's just really important when we're like talking about these systems and talking about, who's being impacted. It's important to put faces to names, or faces to titles, to like labels. So I think it's really great that you mentioned that. And yeah, Gaia is an amazing organization. I actually did their like zero waste giveaway thing a couple of months ago.
Oh, so the meme competition?
Yeah, the meme competition. I was a judge.
Awesome.
I was a meme judge. So anyways.
They tapped you.
Oh, what'd you say?
I said I'm glad they tapped you.
Oh yeah, me too. I think they it was a quality decision. Thanks, Gaia.
Thanks, Gaia.
So yeah, I think you brought up really great points of just talking about the actors, talking about, there's people at every different level of the plastic crisis. And I'm just wondering, it sounds from what you've said that like we specifically need to hold corporations and governments accountable, and institutions accountable to actually addressing how much the plastic lobby has like had a hold on our society. So I wanted to know though, like, how do you feel corporations or governments have actually done well in addressing plastic pollution, and where do you feel like they're still failing?
I can't say a single multinational corporation is doing a good job. Zero. I mean, there are so many false solutions and greenwashing. At times, our team can't even keep up with the baloney. It's ridiculous.
Oh,
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the corporate sector. I think where I'm seeing momentum is smaller, independent, local brands and companies stepping up, not the big corporations. And it's sort of like if they can do it, why can't we? I have a very small zero waste skincare line that I started a couple of years ago. I know as my side hustle, being a business owner, it is so hard to find these solutions. But if you have the commitment, it's totally possible. So I get really frustrated that corporations aren't doing more. I think governments need to also be doing a lot more than they are. There's so many politically correct governments in the world, including ours. I mean, this is a really weird time. But I will mention we've seen a lot of cool legislation at the municipal level, the state level, and the federal levels in different parts of the world that are taking place because there's so much people power behind it. And that's why it matters so much to elect officials that are going to be values driven and really support the people and the environment and their communities. So I'll mention the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, if you're not aware, was introduced in our country at the federal level in February this year. It was introduced by Senator Udall and Representative Lowenthal, and it's the first comprehensive piece of plastics legislation that's tackling source reduction. So they're putting a moratorium on new plastics facilities, because remember we talked about how important it is to stop the petrochemical expansion. I don't know if I mentioned, but they're looking to expand by 40% in the next decade, which is appalling because, I mean, we've already exceeded the tipping point and they want to keep polluting and pumping this shit out. So, that's huge that they're actually looking at stopping it at the source. Most of the policies we see are like ban the bag, ban the single-use water bottle. This is good steps, but we need to take a more holistic look on this. And they're also looking to ban certain problematic products and keep recycling at the domestic level instead of shipping it out overseas. That's also really critical, looking at it from a global perspective. So this is the type of systemic policy reform we want to see. We want it to be looking at everything. The counteract to this is called the Save Our Seas Act 2.0. And it's really focused on ocean cleanup and blaming other countries for the mess. So we have to also look out for legislation that's not looking at the full picture and constantly perpetuating these false narratives that we're already up against because industry has had a head start in a lot of ways. I'm sorry, but it's a little depressing, but the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is it's so exciting. There's a lot of momentum in California, because I know you're in California, so I probably have some listeners. SB 54AB 1080, it's the California Statewide Plastic Pollution Reduction Act. I think I haven't worked on it in a while, so I could be wrong. That's another cool kind of state policy to look out for. It's extremely progressive on plastic reduction and making the narrative about economy versus the environment. I'm going to save you X amount of tax dollars by not focusing on cleanup because we'll just stop it at the source, right? So it's this is the kind of state policy we'd love to see. So if it's successful in California, we could see it going to Washington, Oregon, and hopefully other states. So that's a good one to look out for too.
That's so awesome. No, I'm really glad you brought up tangible policy change that could happen. And I think I totally agree. Stopping it at the source is really important because, yeah, it's I could just see stopping at the source and then being able to build up these young entrepreneurs of color who want to create their own zero waste businesses and actually building a circular economy. And I'm like, this is the dream. But anyways, I think that's just really great that you brought up that there is policies that have been written that are actually addressing plastic at the source because, yeah, most of the policy I was aware of are just plastic bag bans, which I think are useful just as addressing an incentive system and actually making people think. But I think we definitely do need to level up. So I'm really glad.
100%, like great start. But if we actually want to get ahead of this and make a dent so the next generation is literally not drowning in this mess, we have to think much, much, much bigger. We need all hands on deck, multiple sectors.
Totally. And I mean, you've already kind of touched on this, but I wanted to know, like, we've already kind of talked about this. Like, there's different attitudes in both, like, you know, the global north and like Western society, and then the global south. Most people, you know, are just trying to like survive and reuse and like aren't producing as much waste, but then they're having to take in all the waste from Western countries. But I am wondering, like, you know, with the solutions that you all created by figuring out that we need to reduce plastic at the source, like, how do you feel like that actually is including people from the global south in the conversation? Like, how have you all like made sure that like you as an organization, which I believe is like founded and based in the US, how are you balancing like the power dynamics between you all existing here and coming up with solutions, and then people in the global south just like having to deal with it? Like, how have you navigated that?
Well, I'm about to blow your mind because Break Free from Plastic was birthed in the Philippines, in Manila. Yeah, so we're a movement. So we're not an organization. I just want to clarify. We're made up of lots and lots of organizations. Yeah, it was birthed in Tagaytay, Philippines.
Awesome.
Most of my team was actually in the Philippines, in Manila, mostly all over Asia. So it wasn't US and Europe coming up with ideas and putting it on communities in the global south. We also have presence in China, Latin America, and Africa. It's communities themselves telling us this is what's going on. How do we create strategic narrative and interventions and campaigns to hold the top polluters accountable? And so that's how it's happened. Really, the energy and the innovation is in Asia. It's not in the US. I mean, there's some stuff going on here, but every time I go to Asia, my mind is blown of how much incredible, successful work is being done there. It's the pioneer of the zero waste cities movement. It is in Manila, actually, largely due to Gaia. Yeah, so if you ever go, let me know, and you should go meet with my colleagues there. Yeah, so I don't think it's as simple as the West versus the global South. I think there's an enormous groundswell across on fighting against plastic pollution across the globe. And I genuinely think most of it, the innovation is stemming from Asia. And this is really critical because they're unfairly blamed for the plastic pollution crisis. So part of my job in communications is making sure we're constantly feeding the media the right narrative of, well, have you seen these successful case studies of zero waste happening at the community level? It's not people bringing their own water bottles. It's waste segregation at the community level. So they're actually making sure the problematic waste doesn't even enter their communities. And making sure they're creating a value for plastic waste so it goes back into the system. I mean, this is so critical. Also taking a really big look at composting. There's this intersection between sustainable agriculture and plastics. I think, you know, that's often left out of the dialogue too, but in a lot of areas in India and the Philippines, for instance, that's a big part of the local culture and the economy is relying on the land. So it's definitely, I don't think one is necessarily doing it better than the other versus global north and global south, or West versus global south. But I think there's a lot more we can learn taking a global approach than working in silos.
Totally. No, thank you for clarifying that. I think a lot of people have a misconception for sure. I mean, me included. I think there's certain aspects of it that I've had to, you know, hold myself back and be like, oh wait, like, do not put the blame on the communities that are, you know, being impacted by this, you know, because it's like, it's so easy to be like, well, those governments are corrupt and then they don't have proper like waste management infrastructure, so it's their fault that we have it happening. But it's like,
yeah. I'm glad you brought that up though, and that's a narrative we've been working to counter for 3 years is they don't have the waste management. Their infrastructure was never created to handle this much waste to begin with. the waste that they have in their country is manageable. It's the waste that's coming from the global north that's polluting their environment and their people. So we really need to be careful. I think there's, being from India and seeing from when I was like a really little girl to now, there's a growing middle class in these countries, in these areas of the world. So it's really not fair for us as Americans to be like, oh, you guys can't have the culture of convenience and the luxuries that we've had. No, it's your fault. Even though these families are now having more money to buy for, more convenient things for their families. So the zero waste kind of community level work is so important for these reasons. So we can get ahead of it.
Totally. No, thank you for debunking that one too. This is great. I'm just like, what else can I throw at you to debunk? This is so interesting. Well, okay. So I'm interested as my next question is just like, what do you envision like a plastic-free future looks like? Like, what does that actually look like? Like, what would companies be doing? What would government be doing? What would individuals be doing? Yeah.
Well, I think first and foremost, government and corporations need to protect and support impacted communities in the environment whose welfare and health have been historically disregarded for the sake of profit. This is largely because of the extractive economy. First, it's also important to point out that connection between plastics and climate change. And with that statistic I mentioned of the plastics industry expecting a 40% increase in production, even though there are enormous health consequences to the communities of color that live on the fence line of production, we need to make that really clear. When we're not just talking about this water bottle that may or may not be recycled. We're talking about where it comes from and where it's going. And it's not necessarily going to be turned into something else. Or is it going to be turned into a fleece jacket and then have a whole set of microplastic problems? So we really need to hold these government leaders accountable, pass policies that are going to then hold corporations accountable. And then, at Breakthrough from Plastic, where we really look at prioritizing local economies, like we touched on before, because that's a no-brainer, and focusing on systems of refill and reuse. So you're designing products that are not ever meant to be thrown away; they're meant to be reused over and over and over again.
No, that's great. That's excellent, and it leads us directly into breaking down the steps, because I know a lot of listeners are probably like, what can we do? This sounds really complicated.
It is. It's so complicated.
I mean, put a disclaimer in there. There's not like a silver bullet. It requires a lot of different actors, all different things. But sometimes people are like, just buy that bamboo toothbrush. Like that's their silver bullet, you know what I mean? But it's like, we have, like we were saying before, we need people to go deeper and think about these things. So I'm just wondering, a step that I personally have started taking is DMing companies on Twitter and Instagram and just being like, why are you using style? I just messaged a company today. They're based in the Midwest mostly, so probably going to leave me on red. Who knows? They might ghost. Who knows? But anyways, they use hella styrofoam and plastic. And I just DM them and I'm like, you have a great user base of lots of people in the Midwest who probably don't have any zero waste options. Fix your packaging.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm just wondering I think that's, at least for me, it's been a really concrete thing to call out, shout out companies on social media because it embarrasses them. And especially if you have a big platform, you can ask other influencers or people in your community or organizations to also at these companies because it ruins their brand and reputation. So, I mean, I see that as a really specific step that I've been taking as an influencer. But I'm just wondering, what are some of the other steps that either of or Breakthrough from Plastic offers on your website that really could give people the first steps to thinking of solutions in their own communities?
Well, I think that's great. I mean, the more we can call out corporations in a groundswell is going to be huge because, like we discussed, there's a real brand reputation risk. Everything is public now. And Christy, I would say like, forget the DM, just go ahead and post it and tag it. You know, like they don't need to be doing this, you know, behind the scenes. Like, let's get out in front of it. And this is so much of what we do in the brand audit is we actually work with a lot of influencers and people with big followings where these brands would ideally like to probably partner with someone like you to sell their product. And here you are actually saying no, and these are all the reasons why. I think for folks that are probably feeling really intimidated and upset right now, I want to just offer like a really simple thing that I tell people when they're super new to this issue is do a waste it in your kitchen and your bathroom. So I know it's a little gross. You might want to get your reusable gloves, but literally go through your trash, go through your recycling, see what is in there that's probably not going to actually be recycled, and make a couple columns. Like, this is the trash that I found. These are the numbers I'm finding at the bottom of my plastic packaging. You'll see numbers 1 through 7, log that down. And then the next step is doing your homework. You'll find that 3 through 7 is not actually recyclable. 1 and 2 probably will be, but it's not going to be recycled into something of equal or better value. It's going to be downcycled. So really, I don't know why we call it recycling. It's going to be downcycled into a lesser value product that probably cannot then be recycled, which is why there's this whole false solution thing of, okay, let's just turn everything into park benches or yoga pants. It's like, how many of those are we gonna, like, how many yoga pants does each person need? I mean, we'd all have like 5,000 yoga pants if this was the solution. So, I mean, I think we really need to be educating ourselves if we're serious about this issue, if you want to help and do, you know, your part in flexing your kind of citizen muscles, do that inventory. And then once you do that research, you're going to find out so much about what you're bringing into your home and see where you can lessen that. And absolutely tag the brands. If you're finding something in ridiculous packaging, tag them and hashtag break free from plastic. I mean, this is a really easy way to get a little bit more involved. And, you know, the brand audit is still on this year, even in the midst of the pandemic. So would love to give a little shout out to signing up for joining us this year. So we have like a couple different safe scenarios to do it again this year. So you can find out more on our website.
Very cool. Very cool. And yeah, someone asked in the ask a question box, and also if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in the box while we still have our guest live. But the question is, again, it's just asking about like bringing systemic change in our communities. You mentioned talking to local restaurants about having compostable to-go boxes. Are there other suggestions that you have in local community? Because obviously, like, you know, the legislation that you all designed was like probably really like complex, and you'd really have to know the issue. What is like the average thing, like a petition or something that if you're in your local community, you could get going? Like, I know a plastic bag ban obviously would be a long journey, but are there things like that that you would suggest to people that if they really wanted to like take this to like their local city council and just like ask what's going on, how would you lay that out for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the restaurant one is an easy one. You can write like a short and sassy message on your receipt, you know, when you sign it, or a little note. Tell them to follow Break Free from Plastic. I do this on every single receipt, by the way. You do this at your cafe. You know, bringing in, when the pandemic is over, obviously, bringing in your reusable container and having frank discussions with restaurant and cafes around why you would like them to fill up your own container versus a single-use throwaway product. You know, I used compostable as a suggestion, but often there are problems with composting composted materials as well. If they're framed as a bioplastic, it would have to go to a specific facility at an industrial center. It's not going to be composted in the natural environment. For instance, if it's a paper-based compost, you know, we don't want to cut down all the trees. So really the reusability factor is huge. But for my personal opinion, because I work in plastics, I would take a compostable item that's not a bioplastic, but a recycled paper based product over plastic any day. I mean, you don't hear about sperm whales dying from a paper product, right? Like it's always single-use plastic that they're suffocating from. So I'll just put that out there. If you are a parent or a student, I mean, bringing this to your school, your university. I mean, Christy, you did this at Berkeley. You were telling me, and you don't have to have a ton of experience in it. I mean, there's already all the information out there, so it's bringing your voice to the issue and forming those conversations of, equity and accessibility, and the holistic approach that we're talking about here to larger community settings, I think is really key.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it's about reminding yourself that like you're not alone, and there's a lot of people that are thinking this way and are struggling with it. And I think, the idea of like stopping plastic at the source, focusing more of your energy on that as much as possible, and being able to address like how companies and people can do better and challenge themselves. I think, you're alleviating the burden for so many other people. So it's like that action of trying to address plastic at the source with some of your individual actions. It may seem complex, but it's probably going to have a more longer lasting impact than you just buying a reusable water bottle, to be honest. So
yeah, 100% agree with you.
Yeah. So I think that's great. Someone else asked a question. Thank you, people. What is your opinion on zero waste stores? They are becoming more popular. Do you think they are a good step for this movement? And how do you think they could be more inclusive?
Yeah, I do think the zero waste stores are great. Like we were talking about earlier, for certain demographics, that is the push that we need. And every time we have these sorts of local outfits, it's a signal to demonstrate that a future free of plastic pollution is possible. We in Oakland, we have a few, they're not even called zero waste markets. They're just grocers in lower income neighborhoods that are all bulk. So, there's the zero waste with the frou-frou, really expensive products that, you might want to go window shopping in. But zero waste is also happening at all levels in the socioeconomic parts of society. I think it's not just for affluent people or people with money. So like bulk shopping is great. Any chance to refill and reuse. And yeah, I hope we definitely see more of that kind of momentum.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely like sexy and unsexy zero waste. And I feel like the unsexy zero waste is a lot of like tapping back into like saving money and buying things in bulk and like reusing jars and coconut oil instead of buying all these fancy products. And, a lot of it's about like planning and budgeting your time and actually figuring out what is your relationship to the things you own, which in itself could be identified as a privilege in itself for some people.
Exactly.
Doing something like a waste audit could be viewed as a really big time privilege, or like you'd have to have the time and the access to be able to be like, okay, I care enough to actually care about where my waste goes. So again, it's like, I think it's a conversation where we have to like address the people who do have access and education and are hearing these things. If you all can take this information and mobilize to attack plastic at the source, you are benefiting all those people who don't have the time or the finances or the resources to get on that level. And it shouldn't be their fault to not be able to do that and be shamed for not doing that. So I think even more so, I like the idea of a zero waste store. I wrote a blog about it. You all can check it out. But I talk about this in the blog, or my writer, Amath, who's on my team, talks about it too. And he phrases it by saying, zero waste stores are really great. And if we are able to make that the norm, then we can bring the cost down and more people will be able to have access to it. And that should be the end goal, is that more people should have access to these things. So yeah, check out browngirlgreen.org/blog if you want to read.
And that was the system. I mean, that was the norm in our grandparents' generation.
Yes.
I mean, plastics only started, in the last couple of generations, especially at the level we're using now. So it's, in a way, it's like going back to basics.
Totally.
Something a little bit more simpler and more healthy.
Totally. Oh, I like this question. Okay. Someone says, what is your view on recycled plastic products? I mean, you've already kind of talked about this. It's just saying, is it a positive to show there is a market for recycling, or a bigger disadvantage as it likely cannot be recycled again?
You know, recycling was meant to be a stopgap measure. It wasn't supposed to be the full solution. So I kind of like what you said earlier, Christy, like it should more be used in emergency situations versus this is your everyday norm. Like if you have the opportunity to invest in a reusable water bottle, that'll probably save you money over time. Then absolutely use that versus a number one PET water bottle that's going to be downcycled into something else. I do think the recycling system is very, very, very broken in our country, and we're putting the burden on other countries to clean up our mess. So until we have the real domestic infrastructure to fix recycling as it stands, I'm not really in support of what is happening right now. And I think, you know, that's where the policy, the leaders of the policy piece in Break Free from Plastic are really focusing their efforts, working with mission-based recyclers in our movement and trying to figure out, you know, the best solutions forward.
Totally. Someone just asked the last question, just like about the accessibility of composting in communities. Okay. I'm like, we can type this in. It's about like waste, just like, dealing with waste. Obviously it's different than plastic, but their question was like different types of composting. But I think what I'm interested in is like, just like how feasible is it for there to just be better waste management systems in the US? Like, I just feel like there's a lot of cities that don't even have basic recycling, and then we're talking about like eliminating plastic at the source. There feels like a huge, like we're like going from like we don't even have the basics to like addressing plastic at the source. So I'm just wondering, like, is it cool that we're just skipping all those steps? Is that like how it works? I just don't know.
And I think that's the big challenge, right? Because it's not the same across the board. In Oakland, we're lucky because we have compost, recycling, and trash in San Francisco and Berkeley too. But if you go just a couple counties over, or even to Southern California, they don't do composting. And again, it's easy for me to be like, oh, start your own composting farm in your backyard with worms, like, which is what a lot of my friends do in Southern California. But going back to what you said, Christy, it's accessibility and time. You know, these are my friends in their late 20s, early 30s. They've got time on their hand. They don't have families yet. So I think there's a real question of what is the reality of that municipal system, and of course that even gets more complicated when you take it to the global level. I do have a colleague that I really, really respect. Her name's Passion Murray. She works for Detroit Dirt. Do you know her, Christy?
I don't actually. I should check out
her on your show. She's great. But she has figured out the compost question in a really robust way that I can't even begin to understand. But yeah, check out Detroit Dirt. And Detroit, you know, you wouldn't think that would be like a big city for composting. But she works with mostly low-income communities and sets up systems for that kind of infrastructure to happen. So it's really, really cool.
That's awesome.
I know it is happening, but it's a tricky question.
That is a tricky question. So our last question, since we are running out of time, and I'm like, you're so brilliant. I have so many questions, and everyone else has questions. But just if you could list out, obviously, like, you know, you talked about Break Free from Plastic. Check out your website. I just want to know, like, if you could list off, like, off the top of your head, maybe some top resources. You already talked about Story of Plastic, but if there's any other top resources that people who are listening can check out to learn about why recycling is not the answer, the global waste stream, and like plastic crisis. If you could offer any of that and how people can get in touch with you or, learn more about Break Free would be awesome.
Yeah, there are so many resources out there, and like all of our resources are movement and member driven. So you're going to get a wide balance of topics and regions of the world. So if you're really, really interested in, we talked about waste pickers, like that's there. If you want to know more about recycling, that's there. If you want to know about like narrative and culture hacking and lifestyle change, it's all on our website. So breakfreefromplastic.org. Storyofplastic.org is also a great resource. And I think looking into the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is also going to be a game-changing piece of legislation to look out for. And if you do have time and energy and interest, to contact your local senators and vouch for this act, so you can look up more on our website or go to Senator Udall or Representative Lowenthal's website in Congress to find out more about that. Because I do think, all of these things feed into each other, like corporate accountability, government legislation, culture hacking, lifestyle versus, at the community level. But the policy piece is really, really big because it's taking more of a systems approach, and it's going to hit more people and more communities than like a standalone behavior change or going after one corporation. So I think I'll leave on that note.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I just want to say that it's just really inspiring to see another brown woman who's just really leading in this space and just challenging what people would view as the impossible. Just the fact that you're just going after it. It's really just gives me so much hope. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are listening and watching this that are going to be really inspired that you're out there doing it too. I think, just having your voice and having your representation in this space is really, part of the mission and the belief and the value I have in this show is just to show people like you who are leading the conversation. And I really appreciate you being a part of the culture shift.
Thank you so much, Christy. Well, likewise, I'm so impressed with what you've created in such a short amount of time. And you're so young, or maybe it's just the great Filipino skin. I don't know how old you are, but I'm very impressed as well. And I hope to stay in touch. If folks have questions, do you want me to drop in my email, or is that?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, wherever you can put it in the comment box. But yeah, you can
I'm a
check
little
out.
bit slow on email, but yeah.
It's all good. Yeah. So check out Break Free from Plastic, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this live Q&A. It will be uploaded to YouTube, as well as uploaded as a podcast that you can listen to on the go. This is Christy Drutman, and this was another episode of Brown Girl Green, where I interview environmental leaders and advocates about diversity and inclusion, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. I loved having our guest Shilpi on today's show to show some brown woman power, leading the movement against the plastic waste crisis, and really changing the game on how we can address, not just buying a metal straw, but actually taking our actions further. So thank you so much for today's conversation.